Welcome to True Reddit Reads. Today's episode is Pro Revenge. I used theatrics to spite my bully. He was pretty dramatic about the whole thing. TLDR at the bottom. When I was a young man of just 18, I got a job in the Canadian oil patch. It was my first real job. It was the early 2000s, and this paid $20 per hour with no experience or education required. Min wage was sub $6. It was called well testing. Basically, you hook up a closed-pressure tank and flare stack to new oil and gas wells, then flow them, gather data for the oil barons. It's hard work setting up and tearing down, but the rest is recording gauges and computer work. Not bad for a first job. Except for fucking Gary. You work 2-man 12 hours or 4-man 24-hour crews. 1 laborer and 1 supervisor a shift. I was paired with a mean-spirited alcoholic in his mid-50s named Gary. He was overweight and lazy, only helping with things too heavy to lift on my own, like 250 pounds pipes. He spent his days in the trailer for the most part anyway, watching DVDs, napping, and hourly typing a bit of data into a PC. He also liked picking on me with jokes, read insults. I'm not a small man, about 6 feet 1 inch in heels. He was noticeably smaller, yet while not physically intimidated, back then I lacked confidence and have a baby face. I got called stupid a lot. When he found out I had never used a power drill, he asked me, "Didn't your dad teach you anything?" I made the error of telling him my dad was only in my life a handful of years. The next time I made a mistake, he quipped, "No wonder my dad walked out on me." I did call him out on that. Like every other asshole alive, he'd tell me I couldn't take a joke. We always worked far out of town in the country. I often had to eat dinner with him in small-town restaurants. Mostly bars if we could help it. He drank a lot, could actually be personable when not at work, and he was at least too deep. He didn't stop and drank every night. It quickly became the case that I drove us to work in his truck. He made $1 or $1.10 per kilometer, and we could drive 100 to 350 kilometers per day, every day for weeks. 100 miles equals 160 kilometers, FYI. I got minimum wage for travel time. He was hungover most mornings, didn't want to drive, and told me he was boss. He slept like a gin-bloated corpse until we got to work. I worked with him for 3 months. 3 months of demeaning treatment and verbal abuse. I don't react much. It's still true, everyone has their breaking point. I was very used to bullying by then. Long story, I just get silent. I also needed the job. I don't anything until I do, and I don't do nothing forever. Part 1. The power of love. The first step in my quest for vengeance was remembering that it's impossible to defeat evil with the power of love. Part 2. The power of terror. One night while we out of town on a job, during dinner, I mentioned to Gary it's pretty lame he sleeps most of the time while I drive his truck and he gets paid. Maybe he ought to kick a few bucks my way for the effort. He didn't like my suggestion. He be generous. The last hinge must have crumbled because he came unglued. More verbal abuse, and I was young. It actually reduced me to angry tears. When he threatened my job, it was a bad feeling. So I resolved to at least get away from him. I'd been taking notes because I wanted a different crew anyway. My breaking point was achieved. This is usually when my instinct for self-preservation diminishes and impulsive thoughts have fewer safeguards. I wanted to go home. Not revenge, but serendipity delivered the next morning. Gary was once again in his travel coma, and I drove us to work. About 30 kilometers from site of the highway on a pullout was a semi-truck. Luck would also have it was running and trucker was outside his rig. I quickly formulated a plan. Gary always needed to be woken with intent, so he didn't stir when I stopped, got out, and asked the friendly driver for a favor. Trucker man agreed to my terms, got back in his semi to await the signal. Gary, blissfully sleeping off the last of his nightly whiskey, also failed to notice when I maneuvered his truck. Parking it, we were nearly bumper to bumper facing the big, beautiful Peterbilt. I lit the beacon. The truckers of Rohan answered with their own headlights. Like the horn of Helm Hammerhand sounding in the deep, the trucker hit his air horn with amazing commitment to instilling fear. I did my part by honking Gary's truck gleefully in respite and screaming my ass off. I cried bloody murder at blast level and yelled, "Fuck. We're gonna die." Striking like a battalion of bombers singing a chorus of fire, The glorious cacophony lasted less than a minute. When it hit him, Gary dented the ceiling. Good thing he's thick as cement, or that might have hurt. He rocketed up with such force because the amount of shit he rapidly expelled into his pants kept him in debt to his own bowels until retirement. The wonderful sound of his anguished howls segued quickly into apoplexy and rage. While coming to terms with what I had done, he couldn't correctly choke out his death threats. I reversed, peeled off before he decided to get out to make good, and gave the trucker a wave. I got about 10 down the road when Gary felt the need to tell me he had dangerously high blood pressure, and I could have killed him with a stroke. About 4 years later, I went to paramedic school, so yes, in hindsight, I agree with his assessment. Sucks for him. At 18, I had legitimately no idea what a stroke was. What would I even do? Probably ignore him like they did with Stalin. I'd think he was just extra hungover, or being lazier than usual by pretending half his body was paralyzed. Dead. I started laughing and told him he should probably calm down then. I said, "Can't you take a joke?" He kept making incomplete threats, and I just couldn't stop laughing, making it even funnier when he wouldn't shut up. Don't feed it, Gary. I love ugly laughing at angry people. I was a hyena. He was fighting the urge to kill me and the desire to not stroke out simultaneously. The struggle was real. It took about 20 minutes more to get to site. That dance continued the whole time. I even asked him if that was his normal shade of red. Arriving, he ordered me to get out, said I was fired, then stomped off to go call the company owner. Whatever. I had intermittent chuckles and smoked cigarettes while savoring my Pyrrhic victory for the 4 hours it took the company owner to come pick me up. It was a medium-sized business, about 100 employees. He was the GM as well. I got some details. Gary wanted to involve the cops for attempted murder. Boss dissuaded him. Gary told one hell of a tale that left me looking like Satan. So, I told him all about the necessity of Gary's punishment on the way back to the city. He had a good chuckle about it. He was actually a decent guy. I worked for him until I went back to school. I got moved to a different crew, where I could be the lone sociopath. That's about it. I did get some street cred with the rest of the boys at the company. TLDR, I tricked my work bully into thinking he was dying in a motor vehicle collision with a semi-truck. Story 2. My ex-Emile sent her church friends to harass my daughters and I. I have now exposed her family to her church community, and she's getting shamed and shunned at church. AM 46 female. My daughters 17 and 15 have a strained relationship with my ex-husband's parents, 78 male and 80 female. My ex passed away in an accident last year, and we've had some major family drama since due his cheating and him leaving 2 boys born with his affair partner orphaned. She also died. Part of the drama has been my ex-in-laws trying to get custody of my daughters and them also trying to live with us. First one we're going to court over. Second one will never happen. Where we live, there's a weekend market with fresh produce, eggs, meats, and other products straight from farmers. This week was extra special since it was my youngest birthday. Since her party is later in the month, I decided to give her a budget and set her loose on the market to get whatever she wanted. Mostly chocolate and sweets. After an hour, I did start getting worried, and just before I called her, she called me. She was crying, saying some weird people have cornered her. I ran to her with my oldest daughter to find 6 older women berating my daughter for being unchristian, for refusing to spend time with her paternal grandparents, or for wanting to be a good big sister to her poor orphaned baby brothers. My daughters are the ones that found out about my ex cheating and the babies, so they aren't fond of the kids. It's trauma, and they're working with a therapist. I got between the group and my daughter, telling my eldest to go pay the stuff her sister had, and to go to the car. Then I turned to the women, some who I knew from when we went to my ex-in-law's church, and ripped them a new one. They told me I was worst for refusing to obey my ex-in-laws, like a good Christian wife. Barf. Eventually the screaming turned too loud, and we were all asked to leave the market. I met with my girls in the car, the women following me like a group of vultures. I managed to get in the car and drove away. After my girls went to bed, I got online to talk to another member of that church that I'm in good terms. I told him about what happened, and after he apologized, he told me what was going on. My ex-mother-in-law posted this massive story in the church's Facebook group about how horrible my daughters and I are, how we are leaving them homeless and penniless, they inherited my ex's personal bank account and his life insurance, and how my daughters don't even talk to them. She also accused us of being the reasons she lost her grandsons. The boys are now living with distant relatives of my ex-husband. Basically, it was a sob story worthy of a Hallmark movie. And of course, they were getting all the love and support from the more extremist members of their church. This church and its members are a bit annoying, especially with LGBTQ+ topics, but they have a small saving grace. They are incredibly strict about cheating. It's a big no-no, be it from a husband or a wife equally. Now, how did she get around blaming me about affair children without exposing the cheating? She claimed the other woman was our surrogate, since I was unable to have more children. Then said I didn't want the babies because they were boys. Which is absolutely disgusting to be accused of. Well, I decided it was time to clean up this mess, and since I was mid-divorce when my ex died, I had all the evidence needed. And since the divorce wasn't completed, I don't have any legal ramification for releasing all the evidence. I was off the next day and went to a print shop to get copies of all the delightful pictures of my ex cheating, his text conversations with his affair partner, the ones with his parents confessing to his cheating and getting support from them, my ex-in-laws harassing me about the divorce, and my coup de grace, all the emails and text messages of them bullying my daughters about their baby brothers. In one of them, they call my daughters bastards and telling them it was their fault their father died since they told me about the affair and I began the divorce. This one was literally 2 days after my ex died. I paid extra for all of this to be printed in beautiful high-quality paper. Then when I got home, I sat down for hours to make delightfully personalized binders. They look like the little prayer song packets the church give for everyone to take to sing hymns. The first picture when opening the binders is my ex and his side woman making out in our living room. Their faces are easy to discern, and the girl looks nothing like me. Different skin tones and hair color. Underneath I wrote, ex-husband's name and affair girl's name love story. I took them to the church before service. There's a desk in the back with the songbooks for people that need/forget their own, and they never check them. The gossip mill was quick and harsh. The names my ex and his affair partner got called in the Facebook were so bad the pastor himself had to get involved just to keep things relatively PG-13. People were angry at my ex-in-laws for their abuse to my daughters, but what made me laugh was that I was still in the wrong for the divorce. But it is understandable that I failed on my duties after the shock, and I possibly will one day return to the light, unlike my cheating husband and his Jezebel. They used another word I can't use here, I imagine. I got 2 apology letters in the mail for my girl and an invitation to join the church for support. As for my ex-in-laws, they got shamed into leaving the church. My ex-mother-in-law made a post on her wall about how alienated she feels and how no one cares for the elderly anymore. How she wished her great son was still alive since he would have taken care of her and her husband. With what money, I don't know, since I was the breadwinner. Explanation on the will. My ex-husband had a will that named his parents as beneficiaries. As far as I was aware, he had told me he had named our daughters, not them. I never pushed for me to be the beneficiary, as my own will has my daughters as the beneficiaries, not him. Story 3. A lawyer's pro-revenge on a landlord. Landlords are assholes, generally speaking. Everyone knows that. But if you think residential landlords are bad, they're nothing compared to commercial landlords. Landlords of commercial buildings are some of the cruelest, nastiest people I've ever come across. This revenge tale is about a commercial landlord and how I dealt with him. Back in the 90s, sometimes I'd go for lunch at this restaurant in the basement of our building. The place was called The Vault because it had a massive bank vault that had always been there, dating back to the days before the place was turned into a restaurant. The vault was so huge that they could seat a couple of tables in there, and you could eat dinner surrounded by rows of old, gleaming safe deposit boxes. One day I was there for lunch, and the owner took me aside. "The landlord's driving me nuts," he said. "The landlord drives everyone nuts," I said. I was a subtenant in the same building, sharing space with an older lawyer, Aaron, and the landlord was always causing us trouble. I'd already had a few run-ins with him, and we hated each other on sight. In most jurisdictions, commercial landlords don't need court orders to get you out if you're late with the rent. Instead, they just change the locks and you find out about it when you show up and your key doesn't work. Every time our landlord had a dispute with anyone, which was often, he'd always threaten to change the locks. He keeps demanding all this stuff for extra rent, the vault's owner said, and it's really weird because a lot of it's really old. The restaurant owner showed me a letter the landlord had served on him earlier that day. I looked over the demand and read a list of expenses for snow removal and parking lot repair and common area flooring, and all kinds of crap going back years. I read it all the way to the end, and there it was, the usual clause saying he was going to change the locks if the tenant didn't pay this and do that. You do something to make the landlord hate you? I asked, because this is a bit over the top, even for our asshole landlord. He knows I'm moving the restaurant. I think he's trying to grab as much money as possible before I go. Plus, he's giving me grief over the vault. He won't let you take it with you? Are you kidding? It weighs almost 100 tons, and I don't need it. But the lease says I have to remove it, and that I also have to restore the building to what it was before there was a vault. That would cost a fortune. The asshole landlord says if I leave the vault behind when I move, he'll sue. Send your lease up to my office, and let me look it over, I said. I finished my lunch, and when I got back to my office, the lease was waiting for me. It was just as bad as the restaurant owner said. The lease was a renewal of an assignment of a renewal, the original documents dating back to the shortly after WW2 when a bank first leased the place and the vault was installed. Somehow the landlord had suckered the restaurant into taking over a lease that left him liable to remove a bank vault at the end of term. No big deal, I thought. The restaurant can default, and all the landlord can do is sue a shell company. But when I got to the last page of the lease, there was a guarantee clause. The restaurant owner had personally guaranteed the lease, and he was on the hook for removing a vault weighing 100 tons and then fixing the place up. It would cost a fortune. The case was hopeless, of course. That was obvious right away. But then I thought about the asshole landlord with his demands and his threats and his rent hikes, and I asked my brain to do me a solid, which it promptly did. I picked up the phone and called the restaurant owner. I'm fucked, right? He said. You're calling me to say there's no way out. That's what my commercial lawyer already said. But I just thought I'd ask. I can save you, but it's gonna cost. How much? $5,000 in legals and another G-note for the agent. Agent? What kind of agent? Real estate. Send up a check, certified, and leave the rest to me. The check hit my desk in less than an hour. I went to Aaron's office. I need a real estate agent, I said. You buying a house? Nope. Selling a house? Nope. By this point, I'd been sharing space with Aaron for almost 5 years, and he knew me pretty well. You pulling one of your stunts again? He asked. Yup. But nothing that will get you into trouble. Aaron reached out for his old-school Rolodex and started flipping through it. I know a guy, he said. Aaron knew all kinds of guys, and that's one of the reasons he eventually got disbarred. But he knew a guy, and he gave me the agent's name and number, and the next day, I paid the agent a visit. I told him what I needed, and we agreed to terms. I gave him some papers and the cash for his fee. A few days later, I was again at the vault for lunch. The owner saw me walk in and greeted me himself. The landlord's here, he said. Why? For lunch, and to be an asshole. Let's sit in the vault room so I don't have to look at his face. He took me to the vault room, and with the door almost completely closed, we had a consultation while we ate pasta and drank red wine. We're making demand on the landlord, I said, between bites of a perfect carbonara. Demand? What are we demanding? I pulled a document out of my briefcase and passed it to him while I sipped my wine. We're demanding that the asshole landlord release all the restaurant equipment, all the fixtures, the ovens, the freezers, the ventilation, everything you need to run a restaurant. The lease exempts all that stuff, the restaurant guy told me. He can't stop me taking what I want. The only thing that matters is the vault, and of course I don't want that. I shook my head. You need the vault, I said, and we're demanding that he release the bank vault as well. We're insisting that he let you take it out within 7 business days. You think you can beat the landlord with reverse psychology? You think if you treat him like a 2-year-old, you can manipulate him into doing what you want? We'll find out soon enough. He's had the demand for a couple of days now. The restaurant owner dropped his wine glass, and it shattered on the marble floor. You already gave it to him? The restaurant owner said. He got up, swung open the vault door, and called for the waiter to clean up the mess. Let's see what the landlord has to say, I told him, and we walked over to the landlord's table. The landlord was a big, beefy man with a big appetite. He sat alone, eating a rack of lamb wolfishly with his hands. My client needs an answer today, I said. The landlord looked up at me as he chewed noisily. I'm the vault's lawyer, I said. I gave you a demand the other day. My client needs an answer right now. He needs the vault for a new place, and he's got to make arrangements. Arrangements? Your client can forget about the bank vault, he said, wiping his massive greasy hands on an already soiled napkin. But you can't do that, I said. My shock was feigned, but the restaurant owner's jaw dropped for real. The landlord laughed at us. I'm the landlord. I can do what I want. I'm gonna need that in writing because my client might sue. I said. Sue all you like, the landlord told me. Sue till you're blue in the face. He told me that I'd have a formal response by day's end, and then he told me to go away and let him finish his lunch. When the letter arrived from the landlord claiming ownership over the bank vault, I brought it downstairs and showed it to my client. How the hell did you do that? Trade secret, I said. The following month the restaurant moved out, and the place was empty, and that was too bad because I had always liked eating at the vault. Now the restaurant was in a new location 20 minutes away. They called the new place the Vault, and they'd preserved the vibe of the old place. It was very similar, except they didn't have the bank vault. The bank vault, all 100 tons of it, was where it had always been in the basement of the building where I rented space. I showed up for work a little after that, and Aaron collared me. The landlord's looking for you, he said. Oh yeah? What about? He's really angry. He said his deal fell through. Deal? He was supposed to rent the place downstairs to a new tenant, a bank or a credit union or something like that. They were supposed to come in to sign a lease, but they didn't show up. And what's that got to do with me? I said to Aaron, and I said the same thing again to the landlord when he managed to track me down a couple of days later. I know you were behind this, he said, his jowls quivering. I know it was you. That offer from the agent, it was all bullshit. Just a trick to make me keep the vault so that your client could sneak out of the place and leave that fucking bank vault behind. I'm gonna sue. If you're looking for counsel, I think I'm going to have to declare a conflict. I'm gonna sue the restaurant and that agent, and I'm gonna sue you. He stormed off. But the landlord didn't sue. Of course he didn't. He didn't have a contract to sue on, only a vague letter of intent that I drafted, enough to hook a greedy landlord who was used to having his way. The offer he'd received was non-binding, incapable of acceptance without the signing of a formal lease, which of course never got signed. When I left Aaron's place a year later, the downstairs was still unoccupied, with a sad for rent sign sitting in the window, starting to look faded. Story 4. I ruined my ex-boyfriend's life 20+ years ago, and I just made sure it stayed ruined. Sorry this is a bit long. All names changed. Throwaway account for all the reasons. When I was in college in the 90s, I met Jake, then 23 male, through mutual friends. He had already graduated and was planning to move to the opposite side of the United States for grad school, and I had already been making plans to move with friends only a 90-minute drive away from where he was moving to. We had so much in common, fell in love, and it really seemed like fate, both planning to move 3,000 miles and landing so close together. He had 2 sisters and a younger brother who were all awesome people, and I became instant friends with them as well. Because he was in school and I was working, I would usually go to him to hang out on weekends. He was renting a house with 2 roommates, also in his program. We were young, so money was tight, but we had fun, went for taco dates, and spent a lot of time at his house where he was breeding and selling small animals. Jake was an animal sciences PhD student, so being around animals was normal, and I loved it. I met and became friends with his advisor's wife, Mary F. mid-50s, who worked in administration at the university. She is a lovely woman, and I would often have lunch with her when I went over on weekends. Jake was a teaching assistant TA, and I met other people in the program and made friends with him faster than he did. After about 2 years of dating, I was at the house one day, laying in bed together, in a state of some undress, and he said out of the blue, he was concerned I'd been gaining weight, and it made it harder for him to be attracted to me. No concern about my health, it was all about him finding me unattractive. I sat up and said, well, then maybe you should make sure there is better food for me to eat than crackers and cheese when I come up on weekends. Even at 23, I didn't take that kind of BS. I had gained maybe 10 pounds since meeting him 2 years earlier and still wore the same size clothes, about a US size 6 to 8. I wasn't going to engage in a fight about it after all. It was his problem, not mine, so I asked him calmly, so what is your solution to this? He stared at me blankly and said, well, I guess that you should try to lose weight, and I said, nah, I'm not going to do that, so what are you going to do about it? He said, well, I guess nothing, I wanted to let you know how I feel, and I said, cool, thank you, put my clothes back on, went to sleep and drove home the next day as usual. We keep dating, and about 3 months later, he called me and said he wanted to break up after close to 3 years. The reason, and I quote, you don't know enough about science. He felt like he couldn't have a conversation with me about his work where he didn't have to use common names for animals instead of scientific ones. I said, well, that's bullshit. What's the real reason? He said it was the real reason. He came to see me a month later to return something of mine, and I confronted him, demanding the real reason. He finally admitted he had been seeing one of his undergrad students, let's call her Meg, a 19-year-old. He was then 26 and her teacher. I screamed at him to leave. My roommate threatened to throw him off our second-floor balcony if he didn't go, and he left. It hit me all at once after he walked out, and I went from rage to stunned laughter. I'd met Meg a few times, and at one point, she was at his house for a barbecue and spilled something all over her pants. Jake asked me if I could loan her some sweats. I couldn't because I was a size 8 and she was a size 18. Nothing wrong with that at all, but the point is, I realized he made those comments about my weight to try and get me to break up with him, because he was a coward. He clearly liked a big gal. Although, when he'd said those things to me about my weight, it was 1 a.m., I lived about 95 miles away, and we had just had sex, so I don't know how he thought this would go. Even in hindsight, it perplexes me. Did he think I was going to break up with him and storm off into the night and drive for an hour and a half? Anyway, I emailed his roommates. It was the early 2000s. It's how you communicated anything you didn't want to say on the phone. I wanted to let them know we'd broken up and that they were always lovely to me and thank them for being friends. They both admitted they knew about Meg and were the ones to demand that Jake tell me, or they would. That's when he broke up with me with the lame, "You don't understand science" excuse. One of his roommate, a super nice, super cute guy named George, offered to help me get a few things still at their house that he had collected for me away from around the house. He suggested I come up for the weekend, we go out and drink and have a good time, all the things Jake didn't want to waste money on, and I said sure. So I went up and George let me into the house while Jake was gone. I took photos of all of his animals because while I might not be a PhD student, I paid attention and I knew he had an endangered species in his care. He wasn't breeding it, it was an unreleasable animal he had taken in from a rescue organization. There was paperwork he had to submit with a $25 fee, and he refused to do it, saying he didn't want the government in his business. I took photos of that animal, all his breeding conditions, and a photo of an animal not allowed in the state which was in a tank, right next to a window and visible from outside. I then went out for a night on the town with George. We stumbled in early, around midnight, so Jake and Meg, who were watching TV, would see me in a short dress, drunk, and George practically carrying me. I spent the night in George's room. He was a total gentleman but made sure to leave the room and parade past them in his boxers a few times, and we giggled and moaned loudly so they could hear us. When I went to leave the next morning, Jake said I didn't have to act like a whore in front of him as I ate a donut slowly in my rumpled dress with messy hair while George beamed at me and then planted a kiss on my head. Meg looked ashamed, not quite knowing where to look, and I said have fun with my leftovers and walked out. I wanted to think the petty, loud, hook up and a few juvenile insults was my revenge. It was not. The next day I had my photos developed, the good old days, and called the State Office of Fish and Wildlife. I reported the animals in the house, the potential overcrowding of breeding animals, and the 2 animals he shouldn't legally have at all in the state, and asked them how to make a report. Turns out Jake wasn't well liked by his peers in his program, or by his roommates, but I was. George had suggested that he and their other roommate could submit complaints to the university that a TA was sleeping with one of his students and showing her favoritism. The night we were out at the bars, we made sure to tell the story to anyone who they knew. They made sure all the women in his classes knew he was sleeping with Meg. It wasn't a large program, so people knew fast he had cheated and was now dating his student. George and the other roommate made sure people knew they had put in complaints, sick of Jake's entitled BS. With my full statement made and photos sent to the state wildlife officials, I called my friend Mary, Jake's advisor's wife. She knew about the breakup and lame reason, and I let her know he admitted he was sleeping with a student. I'd been emailing with him, and he admitted to it in writing, so I sent that to Mary. To say she was not happy about that was an understatement. She said she made sure it would be investigated and told her husband, Jake's direct advisor, while I was on the phone with her. Speaking of investigations, a few weeks later George called me, giddy, to say state fish and wildlife officials were there, confiscating animals. He told them he would be happy to tell them whatever they needed to know. Meg was there when it happened and told the officials as far as she knew, all the animals belonged to her boyfriend Jake, and that they were all legal. That put George and the other roommate in the clear. One animal was kept in the backyard, so it was implied to Jake that a neighbor reported it. While they were there to investigate, they knew to look in the back window to see the far more problematic, illegal to have in the state under nearly any circumstances, animal. Since George was on the lease, he was able to let them in to investigate in the house. The animals were all in communal areas, and the officers stayed there for a few hours and returned with a warrant to take all the animals and enter Jake's room to investigate. George and the other roommate let them into their rooms with no issues and were quickly cleared. Meg apparently couldn't get a hold of Jake and eventually drove to the university to find him. Remember, no cell phones yet.
It was a good day.
The only animals they left was some guppies in a fish tank. Now, PhD students need grant money to do research, and a large part of animal studies funding comes from the federal government. Jake had just gotten an EPA grant right around when he broke up with me. So I called the EPA and asked how I would report that a person with a federal grant was being investigated for illegally harboring endangered animals. Long story short, he lost his EPA grant and had to make restitution on what had already been used, close to $30,000. He would never be able to get another federal grant. He avoided jail time on the state charges since all the animals were in good health, but lost all his breeding animals, worth thousands of dollars, since they were collected for safekeeping during the investigation when the two illegal animals were taken. In the end, he owed a $15,000 fine, and the two animals went to a nearby nature center. For years, I would stop by, if I was in the area, to visit them. The university revoked his scholarship and fired him from teaching for having an inappropriate relationship with a student. He somehow escaped being expelled, but it always shocked me that he never tried to hide the relationship with Meg, and was so stupidly self-assured he didn't even wait the 4 weeks until she would have been done with his class to start publicly dating her. By the university rules, he would have been in the clear to date her, not being her teacher anymore, and she would just have to avoid any classes he was a TA in. It never fails to make me laugh. After a few months, I emailed his sisters and told them I missed them because Jake broke up with me after trying to call me fat and cheating on me, and I felt weird contacting them. The girls told me he told the family I broke up with him because of the distance. I forwarded them emails that Jake wrote after the breakup, talking about how he fell for Meg and he was sorry about it, but it was true. I couldn't keep up with him academically, and it made him attracted to Meg. Jake managed to convince his dad to pay for 1 more year of school so he could get a master's instead of a PhD, and while I stayed in contact with his sisters and brother via email and then social media, I largely let it all go. I got even made some friends. Mary became like an Annie to me, and I went on with life. I went on to get a master's degree myself, and my specialty? Helping scientists and doctors communicate their work to lay people. You know, us dummies who can't remember all the scientific names. I swear it happened by accident, not design, but I love it, and I work with everyone from small-town doctors and nurses to pharmaceutical companies to museums to state and federal governments to film and TV producers. I travel a lot and speak and get to learn a lot of cool things about our planet and how things work. I knew through his siblings that Jake and Meg got married and had 2 kids. Meg dropped out of the sciences and became an accountant. Jake went back to breeding animals. Every once in a while, his sisters or brother would tell me something over for lunch or via text, but we had our own relationship that exists outside of him. Apparently, when I sent a wedding gift for one of his sisters, he loudly complained at a co-ed bridal shower that all of his siblings still were my friend and didn't make an effort to embrace his now wife, Meg. Apparently, the sister just laughed and said, "I don't make it a habit to be friends with homewreckers." This is how Jake's parents found out how their relationship started and ours ended, 10 years after we broke up. Jake never found out I was behind reporting him to the state, and in the end, I didn't lie about a single thing, except maybe exaggerating a drunken makeout session with George, who is now a successful and tenured professor with a lovely wife and daughters. Fast forward about 20 years to a few weeks ago. I was at a university giving a lecture to a room of 250 undergrad and grad students. In the end, I was mingling with the student afterwards, and I hear a voice say, "Hey, Opie, long time no see," and I realize it's Jake, and I didn't change the expression on my face at all. I was completely shocked, and my instinct was to play dumb. So I said, "I'm sorry, help me out. Have we met at another workshop or a lecture?" He looked incredulous and said, "It's me, Jake," and I said, "I can't place you, but I would love to figure it out." Finally, I gasped and said, "Oh my goodness, Jake. I guess I blocked you out," and said, "Well, lovely to see you," and moved on quickly when he tried to reach out and hug me. I was happy to leave it there, with the satisfaction of him seeing me as a guest lecturer in a science department of a major university when he was just in the audience. The department chair and faculty who had invited me to speak took me out to dinner, and while there, one of them said, "So you know Jake?" I said I did from over 20 years ago, being vague about how. She went on to tell me he had been there for an interview for a teaching position and had spent a few days there observing, and they were likely going to hire him. I couldn't control it, I scoffed. When they all looked at me, I said, "I'm sorry, I'm just shocked he's teaching after what happened at University X." They said what happened, and I said, he was sleeping with a 19-year-old student when he was 26, and he had to leave the program without a PhD because he couldn't afford to stay after losing his scholarship. The three people I was with all looked at each other like they knew they had a problem and said, "Wow, we'll have to look into that and change the subject." My old friend Mary, retired a year or two now but still friendly with her old collages, called me this weekend to say a friend at the university let her know someone had called doing a background check about Jake, and they pulled his file, which included being fired, leaving the program with a lower degree, and the complaint letters from over 20 years ago about his conduct. Mary's name had been on it with her husband listed as the faculty advisor, so she thought she'd like to know. As a bonus, it had a copy of his arrest record for the illegal animals. I guess his dad had paid for a decent lawyer to get the record expunged after the charges were reduced, and he paid the fines, so it doesn't show up on a standard background check. I don't think he's going to get that job. So I will return to my life. Content that the universe comes through sometimes, especially if you give it a little nudge now and then. The best revenge is when you don't have to do anything wrong, you just have to help direct knowledge to the right places. If there is anything I can impart to any young women and men reading this, as I shimmy happily into my now size 10 pants, it's that if someone who is supposed to love you complains about your weight or looks, that is their problem to fix mentally, not yours, and maybe it's time to check out what they're doing behind your back or simply move on. Remember though, it is their flaw, not yours. If Jake hadn't been a coward and tried to make me break up with him and just ended things with me in a mature way, I might not have found out about Meg and turned his own wickedness back on himself. Story 5. Phone calls for the previous owner, who turned out to be my shitty manager. This is going to be a long one. TLDR at the end. This could also go in AITA sub. You guys decide. Names have been changed to keep anonymity. Mobile phones became common in my country around 2004, just as I finished high school. My parents bought me my first phone, a second-hand Nokia. It was bulky and basic, but I promised myself that someday I'd buy a new phone with my own money. When college started, I had a 2-hour daily commute. In high school, I had excelled academically and won several district-level awards. These awards were being distributed during my first year of college. One nationalized bank award finally gave me enough money for a new phone. I bought a Sony Ericsson K300i and a premium SIM card, not realizing it had been abandoned by its previous owner. By the third day, I started receiving calls for a guy named Bitsa from various financial institutions. It turned out the number previously belonged to him, and for 20 years, I've been getting these calls. Determined to keep my premium number, I began a routine of blocking wrong numbers. Back then, blocking was device-specific, so each time I got a new phone, I had to start over, keeping a list of numbers to block. I got my first job after graduating in 2009. Around 2010, I was assigned to a new project with a notorious reputation for burning people out due to a nefarious project manager named Bits. I didn't know his full name for quite a while. He took pride in making our lives a living hell. Bits ruled with an iron fist. From the moment his team stepped into the office, they were met with a barrage of emails and messages, each more urgent than the last. Bits thrived on creating chaos, often changing project deadlines on a whim, demanding his team work late into the night and through weekends. Bits' presence loomed over every task. He insisted on micromanaging every detail, yet was quick to take credit for any successes, no matter how small. Failures, however, were met with his notorious tirades, publicly berating his team and assigning blame without hesitation. His unpredictable temper kept everyone on edge, afraid to make the slightest mistake. Meetings were another tool in his arsenal of torment. He scheduled them during lunch breaks and after hours, ensuring no one could escape his grasp. These meetings were often pointless, serving only to reinforce his dominance and disrupt any semblance of work-life balance his team might have had. His relentless stream of emails continued around the clock, each carrying a thinly veiled threat, perfection or dismissal. Under his reign, morale plummeted and burnout soared. Yet Bits remained oblivious, satisfied only by his complete and total control. I was quite ashamed when I learned that he was from the same area as I was and had gone to the same school, though years before me. In 2012, our company merged with a parent company. Almost nothing changed personnel-wise, but infrastructure-wise we got MS Outlook and an organization view. That was when I first learned about Bits from an organizational hierarchy perspective. His full name was an eye-opener. It was Bitsa. Now, the name was common enough, but at the time, mobile numbers had an area-specific pattern, so I already knew that the previous owner of my number was from the same area as me. Still, it could be someone else. I wanted to dig deeper. I talked with an old mentor who lived in the same area and had coached several high school students for the last 2 decades. He confirmed my suspicions. I won't go into the details, but it was evident that Bitsa and Bits were the same person. I had been quite pissed with this unknown person named Bitsa for almost a decade by then, and Bits had been the bane of my, and several others, existence for quite some time. This is where the revenge lies. First, I unblocked all the numbers in my phone. I was getting 5 to 6 calls daily on average, but after unblocking about 150 numbers, it increased to 15 to 18. My answering strategy changed drastically. Instead of saying wrong number, I politely explained that the owner had changed his number and provided his current number to update their database. This is where I could be the AH. I also volunteered his manager's number, in case he tries something else. The fallout was epic. These people had been trying to find him for almost a decade. Banks had sold his debts to companies that harass people for a living to get their money back. It turned out he had been taking loans in everyone's names, his wife, parents, uncles, aunts, and giving everyone that same number. He was evading credit card debt and loans of upwards of $200,000, equivalent in USD, but it's a shitload of money where we are from. Apparently, he had almost 20 cases filed against him, but no one could find him. Probably why he thought he could walk on water. There are multiple versions of what happened at the office when his manager started to get calls about him. He was let go about 2 months later. Haven't heard from him since. TLDR, previous owner of my number had duped several financial institutions. He later turned out to be my shitty boss. I informed the banks of his new number and his manager's number, leaving his career in. Story 6. Cheat on your wife with mine? I will burn your life to the ground. Way back in the early 2000s, I began to suspect that my wife was up to something. Our 2 kids were about 4 and 6, still young, but not so young they couldn't tell you something about what had happened in their day. They started talking a lot about staying with my wife's parents during the day, which wasn't really that strange in and of itself. But since they lived about 90 minutes away, doing so 2 or 3 times a week seemed a bit much. That was basically every day she wasn't working at her part-time job. When I asked her about it, she denied it, but was never a good liar. So I started tracking the mileage on her car, and sure enough, she was driving an extra 400 or so miles per week. I knew some shit was going on. Then one day I sat down at the computer, and she had left a sticky note with her AOL password written on it next to the keyboard. I could not resist and logged in to read her emails and saw a few email exchanges between her and her college BFF where they discussed how my wife was regularly fucking one of her ex-BFs from high school. No mention of details about him other than my wife also talking shit about his wife, making fun of how she'd gotten fat after having kids. Anyway, I printed out these email exchanges and stashed them. I still needed to know the details, so I called a friend who was a cop, and he suggested I call a guy he knew that had left the force to become a PI. Ron was great. I paid his retainer and gave him the emails and what little I knew about my wife's activities, and he figured out exactly what she was doing. His report detailed with photos and times/dates/locations all about how she would take the kids to her parents, then go meet this guy for lunch. Then they'd go to a dumpy motel for a few hours, after which she'd pick up the kids and return home. At this point, I hired a divorce lawyer. My parents cheated on each other, and the fallout absolutely fucked mine and my siblings' childhood. It was something that was totally unacceptable. I also asked Ron to find out what he could about this guy. Ron absolutely came through. I learned his name, Bobby, that he was married and had 3 kids. I also found out that he worked as a VP of sales for his father-in-law's business. At this point, I had my lawyer draw up the divorce papers. I also asked Ron for a couple more copies of his report, and one more thing I wanted him to do for me. On the same day I had my wife served with the divorce papers at her work, I had Ron meet with this guy's wife and show her everything he'd found out. She seemed nice, and I figured that she deserved to know what her dear hubby was up to. What she did with that information was up to her. While the information about my wife's infidelity didn't really matter in my divorce proceedings, Bob's wife did a real number on him. According to the publicly available court documents from Ambles, the divorce and other related proceedings, she cleaned out their joint account, took the kids, and left. As soon as her dad found out what he'd done, Bobby was fired, and since her parents actually owned the house where Bob and his wife lived, he also got evicted. Their divorce was ugly. Lots of fighting in and evidently out of court. I guess Bob went to the house and started arguing with his wife, and it escalated to the point that her brother stepped in, and Bob got his nose broken. There were restraining orders, a few more incidents with police reports, criminal charges, jail time, and so on. I can't find Bobby on the internet anywhere these days. Last I heard, he'd left the state and his ex-wife did okay. She went to work at her dad's company and took over after he retired. As for me, my ex and I got along well enough. I didn't engage with her on anything that wasn't related to the kids, and now that they're both adults, I don't talk to her at all anymore. I don't hate her or anything, but I only care in the context that she is my kids' mom and is important to them. Nothing beyond that. Story 7. Sister wants to walk down the aisle at my wedding. We use that to our advantage. Here I am, writing this long tale in my honeymoon, but it does feel cathartic to finally type it out, and my husband is more excited about this than the resort drinks. LOL. Anyway, this is a throwaway because I don't have a Reddit account, and my husband, the Reddit fanatic, said he doesn't want this associated with his main. As to why the Reddit guy isn't the one writing this, it's because he said since it's my family, I should be the one with the honor of posting the story, but he is looking over my shoulder to help out. I'm not a lawyer, so I don't know if this works, but I do not give permission for this to be reposted anywhere else. So, I think first it's necessary to give some background, to explain how this behavior reached this level and why our responses were as they were. It's a long read, I apologize. So, ever since I could remember, my parents loved my sister more. I don't mean in subtle ways either. If my sister accused me of something, they believe it and punish me. If I accused her, they wouldn't believe. Even if there was undeniable proof, they'd still give her a lesser punishment and try to find a way to scold me in tandem. My birthday cake had to be a flavor she wanted. Hers did not, and my parents always denied knowing I didn't like that type of cake. They always bought her a bit more than for me. We went to where she wanted, even if it was an event that should be about me. My sister grew up spoiled and didn't like me, just used me as a punching bag. But at first she mostly ignored me. But then it got really bad when we were young teens. I'm not sure what the cause and effect are, but she found herself with no friends and her behavior got worse. Did her friends move? Did they ditch her because she was mean? I don't know, because we were never close and my parents loved to boast about her achievements, but never ever mentioned any issues, whereas with me, they loved to bring out any flaws of mine constantly as teasing material. I only knew she had none because we went to the same school and I noticed her no longer walking around with people. Anyway, she had no friends. I did. I used to be decently popular. My sister realized that, and suddenly I stopped being the occasional punching bag to a hated person she needed to take down at all times. She started accusing me of more stuff. She accused my friends of more stuff. My parents stopped allowing me to hang out with anyone, the excuses ranging from "they're not good people according to your sister" to "why are you trying to leave us? Why can't you be like your sister and enjoy family time?" What saved me from complete isolation was extended family. Most of my family lived in the same hometown, and I got along with my cousins despite some age difference. At one gathering, they invited me over to something, I don't remember what, and I sadly replied I'm not allowed to go anywhere. When asked why, my kid self with no filter replied that it was because I wasn't allowed to have friends since my sister didn't have any. Well, that reached the adults, who apparently tore my parents apart. Later, I was scolded for lying and grounded, as if I had anywhere to go, for a month. But after that they allowed me some leeway, so it was worth it. And my sister changed schools. I guess the humiliation of extended family knowing her social status was bad, and she demanded to be changed. And my parents immediately obliged, even though it cost them more since the school was further away. But she made friends on the new school. However, she never went back to the previous status quo of mostly ignoring me. I guess having felt the power of how badly she could screw with me, and anger that I told family she had no friends, she never let me go. My life was still bad. Her friends would come over and bully me, and my parents called it light teasing. I never called friends over because my parents were awful hosts to them, or my sister would accuse them of taking stuff and they'd believe it. I did become close to my cousins though, since my parents never dared do any of that to family. And then I got my first boyfriend. I didn't want to bring him home at all, but my parents insisted. Well, at one point we were separated, and he came to find me to tell me my sister was flirting with him. By which he meant, she came over with skimpy clothing, batting her eyelashes really badly, and started telling him how bad I was and how good she was. He was irked and ran off to find me. Of course, my sister told my parents a different tale, that my BF had instead tried to flirt with her, but she naturally refused since how could she do that to me? Guess who my parents believed? Now, my BF wasn't perfect, but I immediately believed him. For a mean reason. But remember that back then I was a teen and suffering from the unfair bad treatment. I was very resentful and moody and now hated my sister as much as she hated me. With that disclaimer out of the way, let's talk about looks. I hadn't mentioned them yet because they weren't relevant. My parents were/are overweight. And since they liked showing love via food, giving you more food, buying treats, etc., my sister was/is also overweight, whereas I was/am not. In fact, I've always been kind of skinny because punishment often included no treats or snacks. Obviously, weight isn't what matters, personality is. But my sister even then was already rude and spoiled. Even her flirting attempts were bad because she never learned to work for anything since she could demand, and my parents would deliver. Added to that the fact that she didn't look like some sexy model. Even my self-conscious teen self didn't believe my BF would try and cheat on me with her. Anyway, my parents prohibited me from dating such a horrible boy. I did try to keep going in secret, but it was hard, and the relationship ended. I did get another, but again my sister accused him of flirting with her when he refused her advances. Again, my parents believed her. I tried pointing out how this happened again, but they decided that meant I was incapable of making good choices and kept picking bad boyfriends. The relationship couldn't handle the Romeo-Juliet situation and fizzled out again. I would eventually get called a slut in high school, as I was fine with making out with boys and such but refused to have relationships. Thankfully, it never got back to my sister or parents. My sister did bring one boyfriend home during all this time. He was paraded with pride, and my parents spent every second telling me how good he was and why couldn't I be like my sister and find myself someone like that. Until he stopped showing up, and suddenly he was a conniving bastard that tricked my sister. Oh well. And the unequal treatment continued at this time. She had more spending money. Her curfews were much better than mine. She was free to go anywhere at any time while I couldn't. If I pointed it out, my parents would say it's because she's older. But when I reached that age, I still didn't have the same treatment she had, and when pointed out, they deny they ever said that or claim it was because I couldn't be trusted like she was, using my sister's accusations against my BF and friends as proof of my bad judgment. Time goes by, and it's time for my sister to graduate. She was accepted into a college. Not a very well-regarded one, and she had no scholarship or anything. Again, because only her achievements were told to me, I don't know which colleges she even tried for, so I can't say how badly she was rejected. I do know her grades were bad in school though, because whenever she got AB we would celebrate. I would usually get good grades, but my parents refused to celebrate, claiming since I always got those, what was there to celebrate? My parents, naturally, made a lot of fanfare and told her they'd pay for everything. I was relieved she'd be going away. Not that it made my life any easier. She'd always come home every other weekend, and somehow stuff kept missing from her room or some other issue she'd think of to make my life miserable. My curfews were still strict, etc. Eventually, my mom came to talk to me about my impending graduation. I'm only a year younger than my sister. She told me since they were paying for my sister's college, they had no money to pay for mine. So it would be better for me to start working immediately after graduation and waiting until my sister finished uni to see if they could afford something for me. Oh, and if I decided to stay at home, I'd have to pay for all my stuff, part of the bills and rent. I pointed out I could get student loans. Mom said yes, except no. That is, because they were so caring towards me, and I had such bad judgment, they would decide if a college was worth my getting in debt or not. I'm not sure how they'd stop me from getting loans, but I didn't ask. Scholarships weren't mentioned. They had no idea what my grades were anymore and never believed in my capabilities. Anyway, I didn't bat an eyelid. I simply said okay. My mom clearly didn't expect that and kept pushing. Maybe she hoped I'd throw a tantrum so they'd have an excuse to not ever pay for my college. But I said nothing except I understood their position, thanked them for caring, and that was that. My dad later tried the same, but I also refused to be emotional. You see, after a whole lifetime of their terrible parenting, I never had any expectations towards my education. I knew they would find an excuse to not pay for mine and make my life miserable. I never believed they would eventually pay it if I worked and waited for my sister to graduate. I had been preparing for college for a long time. I could barely go out, my friendships were slim, so I had a lot of time to study. And study I did because I saw college as my only chance to be free. Well, the time came, and I worked my ass off and got a scholarship. Not to anywhere like Ivy League or anything like law or medical school. But it was a good enough course in a decent college with a full scholarship. Knowing my sister would hate it and try to stop me via parents, I put my achievement in social media at the same time I told them. Even forced myself to thank them in the post. Now, they couldn't forbid me from going, as they'd have to explain to family why not. Initially, they were even a little proud and boasting about it. And then I guess my sister got to them, and they changed gears and even asked me if I was sure I wanted to go. They let slip my sister wasn't doing well in college, and since she was smarter and had better judgment than me, I'd suffer worse. I obviously stuck to my guns. They weren't happy, but couldn't do anything. College was my savior. I started being happy. I still contacted my parents and visited on holidays and such, but since they refused to pay for anything, I could excuse not going a lot due to money. During this time, I avoided introducing any man to them. And my sister stopped going to college. I know she didn't graduate because, again, they'd have made a fanfare about it. Moved back home, paying no bills or rent, but it's different, my parents said, and started working at the same company as my mom, obviously thanks to my mom pulling strings. This was all sold to me as a source of pride. Oh well. Almost there, I promise. I met my husband around this time. You know those people that say that if I was in X situation, I'd have done something? My husband is the type that really does. I'm the person that is meek and a doormat in any situation and then can't sleep at night wishing I had done something, had thought of something witty to say, etc. I'm the person that can't help but cry when I'm angry. My husband is the guy that claps back immediately. He loves drama, in that he loves to resolve it. He's the guy that if he doesn't immediately reply to a slight, you better start worrying because he won't forgive and forget. He's just doing something worse for revenge. He's the one that wanted me to post here. And wanted to post on a nuclear revenge board too, but decided what we did wasn't nuclear. People were baffled. I got together with him. But just because I was incapable, thanks to my upbringing probably, of acting like him, it didn't mean I didn't like it. I love that my husband does what I can't. And he treats people well as long as they do the same to him. When we discussed marriage, we decided we didn't care much about the ceremony due to our budget, as we'd rather spend on a dream trip to Europe for our honeymoon. As for where to do it, since his family was spread out and mine was still mostly concentrated in my hometown, we decided to do it there. We weren't living too far off either, so we could take some long trips during the weekends to manage stuff. Plus there was some work flexibility, so we could stay in my hometown for a bit too if needed. We sent out the engagement announcement and the save the date for a few months later. Well, at this point my parents naturally demanded they meet my man. I wanted to grow a spine and refuse but was having a hard time. The distance had made me think maybe my parents weren't so bad. Well, my husband looked like I canceled Christmas when I told him I would at least ensure they were never alone with him. See, he had been getting ready for this. He even bought a high-quality recorder he could hide in a pocket to record it all. He was stoked, thinking of all the ways he could refuse my sister's advances, insult her, and then spread the recording of her attempts to my family. So, off he went alone, and excited to meet them. And came back later euphoric. Babe, you won't believe the awful shit they wanted. Babe, we can fuck them over so bad. There's so many possibilities. I was confused and wanted to hear the recording, but he, smartly, told me it was better to listen to him first, or else I'd misunderstand him. Well, he went there, and instead of the flirting, my parents and my sister sat him down. After some grumbling about not being okay with him, my judgment, etc., they proclaimed they were willing to pay for my wedding, on one condition. My sister would walk down the aisle on my wedding first, in a wedding dress. Their excuses were that it wasn't okay for a younger sister to marry first, so it was only fair if my sister had at least the experience of it. On my venue, with pictures being taken and the dress, and she'd have a cake later too, etc. My husband will now type his part. Hey, vengeful husband here. Hell hath no fury like a pro-revenge / instant karma / nuclear revenge lurker when his beloved is scorned. That said, as much as my wife, teehee, she's my wife now, paints me as this quick-witted dude, I admit my neurons all but short-circuited when those folks legit suggested that shit like some sort of great fucking gift. Even Troy would rather take in the horse a second time, methinks. Alas, after my brain rebooted, I did have a whole-ass catalog of insults about to spew out, but something in my soul whispered in my ear like the devil. String these fucks along. So I said I needed to think, see how my wife, back then fiancé, would react, and then ran out of there before I could give away my nefarious plans. Back to me, the wife. So, my husband sincerely recounted how my parents wanted even my wedding to be about my sister, with a grin on his face, and had the recording to prove it. I was shocked. The distance had softened how bad they treated me, and I thought even they wouldn't go so far. Thankfully, my husband insisting on the angle of revenge helped me not go to a bad headspace. We had a blast thinking up ways to screw them over this. From ridiculously outlandish to what we thought was feasible. We then called his much more level-headed brother when we decided on a plan. It involved having 2 venue addresses, giving them the wrong one, etc. Well, level-headed brother scolded us for it. While he acknowledged he would never be able to convince us from retaliation, he at least showed us something like that would be hard to pull off. Some of our other ideas were also at danger of getting sued. So we eventually settled for the most benign plan: act like we agreed, but then hire security and don't let her in. Obviously, if that was all, it wouldn't be pro-revenge. The rest is all mostly my husband, but he wants me to do the honors, so here goes. Just important to mention, everything he did was previously discussed with me and were our mutual ideas. He went back to my parents, said he probed, and thought I wouldn't be down with it. However, he didn't see the issue, and not wanting family to fall apart would be down to helping them do it. He pointed out I don't like conflict, so if I was surprised with it, I might not throw a tantrum in front of all the people. On the other hand, marriage is a big thing, so who knew if I'd lash out? Thus, he suggested a compromise. They'd help pay for stuff. This way, I would feel even more pressure to not say anything, as not only would we be public, well, with our families there, but I'd be grateful to the help they gave, and that'd mollify me. He said my parents looked surprised by my grown sister starting skipping with joy. Literally so, like a kid.
So it was accepted.
Important. My husband also claimed that due to some bad judgment in boyfriends in the past, these words were all my idea, and I'm so proud of using their words against them, lol. I was distrustful and controlling, and liked to check his phone and stuff to ensure he wasn't cheating on me. As such, it was imperative that nothing of this plan was ever put in any writing. For any discussion pertaining to my sister walking down the aisle before me, he'd go over to their house to talk. And so began the months of deception, where my parents and sister thought they were tricking me, and my husband and I were milking them.
How?
Well, rather than pay for the wedding then lay low, of course my parents wanted input in everything. Some stuff that meant a lot to me, the songs and color palette, my husband would convince them to let it go to keep me in line. But since we never really cared for the ceremony to begin with, everything else was game, or so they thought. What we did was thus. We'd go, say, to check the drink and menu options. We'd then accept the lowest or second lowest priced option. My husband would then secretly take my sister there to also try it out, then sigh and say it's a pity we don't want to abuse my parents' goodwill, so we wouldn't get the best options. Cue my sister demanding my parents pay for the best. My parents would then tell me not to worry, and they'd pay for the most expensive. Same was done with photographer. Flowers. My husband handed my sister a bouquet of the flowers we wanted, then sadly expressed how I wanted some other, tasteless flowers. Cue my parents telling me they wanted us to go with said flowers and they'd pay for it. Wedding dress. We hit a minor snag here. My parents wanted me to use a hideous dress. Okay, not outright hideous, but it wasn't my style and wouldn't look that good on me. We had planned on saying yes then simply not using it, but my mom sent me a message about it so there'd be proof I said okay. We had to go with me refusing in text and standing my ground. My husband went over there and said he'd see what he could do. My sister suggested ruining my desired dress, so I'd be forced to wear the other one. He pretended to agree. During all this time, they really kept communications outside any text. We made sure that had happened by when my sister tried messaging my husband, have me reply to here. This solidified that I'm controlling and neurotic claims my husband was making. So they believed it and never risked anything in writing. And maybe some people might not like the thought of their partner going around and talking badly about them to family. But I'm such a doormat that the thought of being painting as this controlling and dangerous bitch is extremely funny to me, and I egg him on to do it. I guess I have a warped sense of humor, lol. Oh, and my sister did try to flirt with him, but he acted conflicted. Also, to really sell that he was with them, my husband would pretend to tell them things without my knowledge. But he never told them we hired security. It was really funny. My husband and I, who had sincerely considered a courthouse wedding to focus cost on our honeymoon, having this extravagant, expensive wedding, and barely spending a dime. We called it back pay for emotional damages from my parents, lol. I think my husband, okay, he just confirmed I'm right, lol. Was enjoying the whole tricking them more than planning our wedding, lol. I didn't think it was possible to witness a guy beaming at the thought of wasting his whole Saturday doing a car trip to discuss wedding details with his in-laws, but here we are. Soon the day came. The plan my parents/sister/husband had come up with was, wait until everyone was seated. Since the bride always comes out late, they'd have my sister arrive at that precise time to avoid me seeing her and trying to stop it, and walk down the aisle. By the time I heard what happened, it'd be too late to do anything. As for my dress, we saved some of the leftover fabric from my dress alterations, and my husband took that to my parents' place. Sister still lives with them even now, and showed them as proof he'd ruined the dress. Then said he had to go back to me as I was raging and he needed to calm me down. He'd see them at the wedding. We made sure to keep our actual security hidden at first. As the guests and my parents arrived, all they could see was a woman with a list of names to check. Only after my parents arrived and sat down did we bring out security. A guy that looked like a bodyguard. We told him to not allow anyone my sister in, and even agreed on paying a handsome tip if he didn't reveal we told him that. Soon the time arrived. My parents got a text my sister was less than 5 minutes away, so my dad went and told people to start. My bridesmaids had been told to follow his lead beforehand, so they obeyed without checking with me. After they all went down and took their places, my dad stood up at the entrance, as if waiting for me. During this, a friend not in the wedding party texted me to get ready. This because if my husband or bridesmaids etc. took out a phone and started texting, people might notice. This friend was in on the plan. She's my husband's friend, as willing to help stir drama as he is, and didn't care about being a bridesmaid or anything. Well, as soon as my dad took his position, the bridal song started playing, the doors open, and I come in. My dad looked aghast at me being there. He tried glancing behind me, but you can't see the venue entrance from where we were, so he couldn't see what happened to my sister. And then his phone rang, I saw the caller ID, and it was her. He just left me there with a mumbled something came up. There were gasps and confusion all around. The friend in on it loudly asked what happened. I lied, and in a teary voice said he told me it wasn't supposed to be me there. It's not what he said, but my husband and I agreed that if he dared leave me, I should say that to make him look the worst possible. As for the tears, I wish I could say it was just my stellar acting, but no. Despite everything, a part of me didn't think he'd go as far as abandon me there. That the sister thing wasn't true, but an elaborate joke. I don't know. I was hurt, still am, so I was sincerely trying not to cry. The friend then loudly went, "What did he mean by it shouldn't be you?" So that as many people as possible could hear and spread it, then went, "I will go and check," and ran off. We decided to do this to make her create hell with the security and stop my dad from coming back and stopping the ceremony or something. At some point my mom also left. At this point, my husband's dad quickly ran over and took my arm. He'd been forewarned he might need to. Watching him run desperately to me helped me smile. I walked down the aisle to whispers as people discussed what happened. Some apparently left to check too. When I reached my husband, though, all was well. He made me feel better, joking my sad face was so real I deserved an Oscar, and don't worry, he'd rake them over the coals for what they did, lol. We got married without a hitch. My parents didn't come back. I did notice a lot of people leaving then coming back during the party, but no one dared tell me what was happening. Someone did come and whisper in my husband's ear, and he went out. He came back after a while, with a thunderous expression, but whispered in my ear he needed to go hide somewhere before he broke character, and started smiling, lol. Well, what happened is, it worked. The following is the summed account from friends, family, the security guy, and my husband that I received afterwards. My sister did arrive in a wedding dress. The security refused to let her in. Per our agreement, he claimed she must be in the wrong venue because there was already a bride. And yes, we tipped him really well as promised. My dad went there and tried threatening him with police, claiming he never heard of him, so he couldn't be working there. The security agreed to the police, since he was hired by us and doing his job. My dad realized by then it'd be too late, and tried to demand he let my sister in. At this point the friend came over, started shouting and insulting my sister, and asking what was going on. Basically stalling. My mom soon came, and eventually other people. At this point the wedding plan was bust. All my parents could do now is damage control, as everyone that learned about it was aghast they'd try and pull it and screaming and berating them. The three naturally said it wasn't a secret, and threw my husband under the bus. At this point, my husband was summoned. When he came over, he put on his best look of confusion and denied. To quote him, gaslight, gatekeep, girl boss LOL. He denied having ever agreed to something so ridiculous. When they insisted he did, he demanded proof, and of course, they couldn't produce any. All text exchanges they could produce were about normal wedding decisions. My sister was crying, and apparently sat on the floor kicking her legs like a kid. My dad looked like he'd beat my husband, but security and other people held him back. Of course, they said they had no proof, because my husband told them not to text. My husband laughed and said, "Wow, how convenient, huh?" Then again repeated, why would he ever agree to something so fucked up? Tore them a new one about being awful parents, then said he wasn't going to let their stupid plans and lying get in the way of his wedding, and went back to me. No one believed them. The venue had cameras, but they refused to show me the recording as that was only for security purposes. But some people filmed parts of it. Watching my parents and sister get ripped apart by any and everyone that came out to check the drama was delicious. After years and years of being accused of stuff and not believed, to watch them have a taste was one of the best wedding gifts. My mother was crying, my dad kept changing from purple to white, my sister was still on the floor crying and screaming. They kept insisting on that my husband wasn't on it. But people kept asking, why would my husband agree? Why was there no proof? Why did they want my sister to do this to my wedding? And they had no good answer to any of it. Eventually, they were told to leave and had no choice but to do so. My dad apparently had to drag my sister up as she refused to leave the ground. Again, people said nothing to me all night. I guess they wanted to spare me. And maybe it's because I was the bride and not just a guest for once, but it did feel like everyone was making extra effort to be nice, positive, and excited about everything. My husband says, all the expensive shit they were eating, drinking certainly helps, LOL. We had a blast. My husband maintained the forced angry face for only a short while before breaking out in smiles again. After that, we went to the hotel to catch some sleep before going to our honeymoon. Speaking of which, my parents did try to pay for our plane tickets, but we thought that was risky as they could try and cancel them or something, so we refused. Of course, since that whole thing, the three have tried to contact me. I've refused calls because my husband insisted on keeping a paper trail. Smart thing, because my sister did eventually message me. I won't repeat it as it was very unhinged and didn't make much sense, but the important part was that she blamed me for her humiliation, called my husband a two-faced snake that fooled them for months. He wants to print and put that on our wall, LOL, and hoped, but was also certain it'd happen, that I'd get cheated on by him. She did also suggest he was cheating on me with her, actually. My husband took my phone, screenshot the call logs, screenshot my sister's message, screenshot some messages of my parents demanding I pick up the phone, and sent it all to my family group chat. And sent screenshots of messages to him, where they called him names and threatened him, but he kept up the "you're delusional, I never agreed to anything" shtick, and even threatened to sue them for defamation and harassment. He wrote a message in said group chat begging my family for help, as I was now being harassed by them constantly. He begged family to help stop them from trying to ruin my honeymoon now that they had failed to ruin my wedding. Then finished neatly with a request that they don't share our locations, to avoid my parents sending my sister over, and then claiming he had somehow agreed to pretend to fuck her in our honeymoon suite. LOL. My family assured him they'd take care of it. And indeed, since then we've had silence. My husband is a little disappointed my sister didn't disobey, so he could tattle again while tearing her a new asshole. We'll see if it'll last. All in all, while I obviously would prefer to have a normal, loving family at my wedding, at least for once in my life, they not only failed to ruin something meaningful to me, but I got them back. Extra info. Do I know why they treat me like this? I've been asked this question a lot, so I assume you all will think the same. I have wondered this all my life, and I still don't know. I tried asking when I was young, but they denied any difference and scolded me for acting spoiled, so I quit trying. I've thought of many possibilities, but based on my observations, I think it's this. I was unplanned. They took a while to have my sister, so she was not only wanted but also like a miracle child after so long. However, given our age difference is quite small, I think they didn't expect it to have a kid so soon or easily, and didn't use adequate protection way too soon after my sister's birth. And maybe didn't notice my mom was pregnant until too late. So they were saddled with an unplanned baby while still dealing with a newborn. And they're not that well off, so having the extra expense likely didn't help.
So they resented me.
But that's my conjecture. Regardless, I've accepted the answer won't truly matter. What they did to me was unwarranted, no matter what. Did they really think this would work? My husband and I talked, and we have the theory that they never wanted to do this at all. We think my sister threw a tantrum over me getting married first when she barely gets dates, and they gave my husband that outlandish proposition. As in, they didn't want to pay for my wedding and didn't think we'd accept or that it'd even look good for them to do it. But by suggesting it and being refused, they could look like the good guys to my sister, while having an excuse to not give me a dime. But then my husband accepted it, and they couldn't backtrack, or else risk my sister turning on them. Summary, because it did get too long. Bad parents want to have my sister walk down the aisle at my wedding first, in wedding dress and all. My husband pretends to go along with it, and uses this as an excuse to get my parents to pay for the most expensive stuff possible for my wedding, which they only did because they thought it would be for my sister's sake. When the day comes, though, we hired security that didn't let her in. When family called out my parents, they said my husband wasn't on it. But my husband denied it. There was no evidence, so no one believed them. So now family is against them, no one believes them, my sister didn't ruin my wedding, and we got a lot of money out of them. So, what do you think of all this story? Drop your thought in the comment box. Don't forget to subscribe, like, and share.